Okay, let's start. Hi, I'm Ken Johnson of below2c.org, and I'll be the moderator today. I'd like to start by thanking all of you for joining us in this webinar sponsored through the collaboration of 6 different Ontario NGOs. And the first thing I'd like to do is ask Michael Barkley to do the land acknowledgement. Michael?
Thank you, Ken. We'll begin this webinar on sprawl by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous people from the beginning. As we are tuning in from all over the province, mostly, there may be a few from out of Ontario, there are many nations to recognize. We acknowledge that there are 46 treaties and other agreements that cover the territory now called Ontario. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made both in shaping and strengthening the communities we reside in, our province, and the country as a whole. For those of us who are settlers or descendants of settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. Thanks, and I encourage everybody to continue to learn as much as possible about the Indigenous nations where they live. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, we're very excited today to have all of you on here, because we have 3 Ontario activists to speak about Doug Ford's urban sprawl agenda, which of course is more relevant than ever given the election results. We'll have a presentation from our 3 distinguished guests, Phil Pothen, Jenni LeForestier, and Lilly Noble, over the first 40 minutes. Then and during that time, I'll ask any of you to put questions in the Q&A that we'll then pick from, the ones that are the most common probably, and ask some questions. I'll ask a couple questions first, and then I'll turn it over to Terry, who will ask questions that are coming up in the Q&A. We'll end the formal seminar about 8 o'clock. However, for anyone who's keen and wants to hear more from the 3 panelists, we'll continue on for what we call an after chat for another half hour. So anyone who's keen can stay, and anyone who wants to start preparing for the NBA game tonight, they can leave this webinar at that point. Our first guest is Phil Pothen. Phil is a land use planning and environmental lawyer with a background in landscape ecology and landscape architecture. He has 10 years of experience advising and representing provincial policymakers, select small builders, and concerned residents. He joined Environmental Defence Canada, just a great organization, I'm thrilled he's with them, to advance big picture approaches to problems he has dealt with case by case, a comprehensive alternative vision for development and industry that meets people's needs while preserving Ontario's natural spaces, farmland, and other green fields in perpetuity. Having spent his summers searching out berries, moose tracks, and rabbit burrows in the woods and barrens near his home, I assume that was when he was a kid, he has been pleased to introduce his 3 children to the many similar pleasures available in Toronto's own urban ravines. Over to you, Phil.
Hi, folks. I hope everyone can hear me all right. So I think we all know why we're here. In the recent election, a solid majority of Ontarians voted for candidates who promised to curtail urban sprawl and cancel Highway 413 and restore conservation authorities and endangered species protection and turn car-dependent suburbs into complete communities. But because of the really outrageous peculiarities of Ontario's electoral system, most of the MPPs who were actually elected to Queen's Park did not make the same commitments that Ontarians voted for. And that's why Ontarians are going to have to keep fighting at every level of government for laws and policies and decisions that protect the environment. The good thing is, like, we've had to do this for the past 4 years. We have scored some victories, and we know that it works. So the idea here is to outline some steps that we can take right now, starting this summer, to snatch victory from the jaws of this provincial government. So here are the 6 points. First, don't concede the point. Don't concede that this election was in some way a pronouncement on Sprawl or Highway 413 or the issues that we're concerned about, because the polling and the actual results of the election, the popular vote, show that that wasn't the case. Second, support proposals to add a lot more homes to existing neighborhoods. That's something that we can do at our local level, and I'll explain how that fights sprawl. Third, we can end exclusionary zoning within our municipalities and use all of our political capital to help deliver that. Fourth, we can win municipal elections. And I'll explain what that means. I mean, it's obvious in light of 2 or 3, but those elections are coming up this October. And while it's not possible to deliver the large-scale victories that we'd like through municipal elections, we can deliver them locally, achieve lots of these environmental wins within our own cities or municipalities if we get the right councils and mayors. Number 5, despite what folks may think, 413 isn't over. In fact, it's quite likely that it will be stopped if we have a proper federal environmental assessment. And number 6, a more fun one, which I'll talk to you about at the end. So the first thing is, don't concede the point. So sprawl proponents we know that they're going to try and bulldoze opposition for this so-called honeymoon period after the election by claiming that the voters have spoken in favor of 413 and boundary expansion. This really isn't true. So by E-Day, we didn't have great popular opinion on 413, say, a year and a half ago. But by E-Day, opponents of 413 outnumbered supporters by a huge number. Like we're talking 56% to, we're talking 20-something% to 49%. And on sprawl, we know that 56% now prefer that housing go to existing neighborhoods to ensure that in those neighborhoods, most people can get by without a car, rather than go to the outskirts of communities with a view to continuing car use and maximizing the ease of car use. And most Ontarians, that's part of the picture. Those are polls, though. And the reality is, the big thing is that most Ontarians voted for candidates who actually had committed, because we had very express commitments, more express than really ever before, from the Greens and NDP especially, but also from the Liberals, to deliver essentially fixed settlement area boundaries, cancel 413, increase intensification rates. Most people voted for parties that made those commitments. It's just that because of the vagaries of our electoral system, the makeup of Parliament didn't reflect that. So let's go ahead. That's the big point, to kind of keep the conversation open. I mean, we didn't lose on these issues. Second, become a green YIMBY. Now, what does that mean? What does that have to do with fighting the sprawl agenda? A lot of the bad decisions that we've seen in Ottawa, in York region, in Durham region, around sprawl, they've really been the product of this unholy alliance between sprawl developers and land speculators on the one hand, and what we call residential NIMBYs on the other hand. So the case in every municipal fight that sprawl developers have made is that, oh, you don't want more housing in your own community. People won't support it. People don't like densification. People don't want townhomes in neighborhoods of single family homes. People don't want walk-up apartments in neighborhoods of single family homes. And therefore we just have to sprawl, because how else are we going to build the housing we need? And so, two sides that often claim not to be on the same side, they've really supported each other, because every unit of housing that doesn't get built in a neighborhood because someone says the building is too tall and needs to be reduced in height, or someone needs to protect the view, we've got to protect the angular claim. Every one of those units is an additional piece of farmland or natural heritage that's lost on the outskirts. There's really a direct relationship. We're talking about housing a certain number of people, and if they're not housed in one place, they've got to be housed in the other. And the alternative is that they remain homeless, right? Which is obviously something we don't want either. And so this means that we can stop sprawl because every additional unit that we get approved within existing neighborhoods is one less piece of farmland or natural heritage that's lost. And so this is really a really winnable front in the battle against sprawl. And we can really snatch victory here out of the jaws of defeat because we know we've done it in the past. So in the past, prior governments have approved theoretical boundary expansions. They've made it legal for developers to apply to destroy farmland. There is a huge, massive glut of land that's been opened up for development already. But guess what? It did not get used. Despite being legally available, it did not get used because Toronto approved substantially more housing than was expected to approve. They exceeded the provincial target substantially. And that increase, that excess housing, supposedly excess housing, meant that Durham hardly used any of the sprawl land that was allocated for it previously. Halton region barely made a bite in the land that had been allocated for sprawl. And we can do that again. There is a more extreme, even now, boundary expansion proposed in Durham, in York region, and Peel, but there's no reason that that actually needs to get built. We can really kneecap the sprawl developers' plans, the land speculators' plans, by really embracing that housing within our existing neighborhood, stealing that market share, welcoming those people into our communities. And so just to show how huge that impact is, the area in red is the land that was allocated in the previous round of boundary expansion for sprawl in the GTAH. And the area in black is the only land that was actually used out of all that land that was allocated for boundary expansion. And so little land was used because of Toronto exceeding its development targets that we were actually able to save it long term. We would have to double or triple the rate of sprawl in a lot of these regions now in order to use up the land that's already been allocated. Forget the recent Ford boundary expansion. To use up the previous, Wynne government boundary expansion, we would have to double or triple the rate of sprawl to get through it. So we can stop that sprawl. We can frustrate all of these efforts just by welcoming more people to our existing communities. And the impact that you can have as a green YIMBY or as a left or social justice YIMBY is huge. This is a project that was in my own neighborhood that was being proposed, and it's built now. This is modular housing, and it initially received this kind of torrent of negativity from locals, folks like this guy who claimed that a parking lot was the heart of his community, and therefore we shouldn't build supportive housing in the community. But because people on the progressive side of the spectrum, people who were environmentalists, really jumped into that conversation and won it. Those folks ended up looking pretty silly in the end. And that development was approved, and we got that housing built, and that many fewer people are homeless. But so there's a second piece. So that's the first piece, support individual development applications that build more housing in your community. But the broader piece that we need to recognize is that we can get rid of exclusionary zoning. And you may have heard this at the provincial level, the provincial laws that would prohibit exclusionary zoning province-wide. And just to be clear, so exclusionary zoning is planning rules that keep most of our residential land frozen at densities that are too low to support public transit and amenities within walking distance. They keep most of our residential land reserved for single and semi-detached homes. And people think of it as protecting the status quo, but it really doesn't. And I know there's someone here called Sue, who's on this call, who knows that it doesn't. What it really produces is these McMansions that you see on the top, taking the place of bungalows, because we have rules that make it much easier to build a giant honking home with a garage on a lot than to build 2 or 3 modest family homes on that same lot in the form of townhomes or semi-detached homes or a garden suite. And so by changing these rules, we can substantially increase the population density of our communities, fix the mistakes of the past, get them up to densities that make it viable to provide frequent transit, support shops and restaurants within walking distance. And that is what has got to be done to tackle car dependency. And just to show the link between density and car dependency, it's just so obvious. To have a look at this map. This is the map of Ottawa. The top map is, I believe, active transportation and transit modal share, and the bottom map is population density. And you see pretty much they're just the same map in different shades. You have got to get your population density up if you want there to be those amenities, if you want to tackle car dependency in your community. But even if we had an unlimited supply of suburban land, the low densities of existing neighborhoods would be a problem that we would need to tackle, just because we can't tackle climate change simply by shifting our existing car trips to EVs. There isn't enough renewable energy. There's not going to be enough renewable or zero carbon energy to turn every gas car trip into an EV trip. We have got to dramatically reduce the number of car trips we take, and that can only happen by turning car-dependent neighborhoods into complete communities. And the good news is that support for this is much more than you would think. We did extensive public opinion polling. This is from the GTAH, but others have done it elsewhere and produced similar results. Contrary to what you'd think if you go to a community meeting, people who support adding a lot more bungalows and garden suites or homes like apartments in buildings of up to 3 stories vastly outnumber the people who oppose adding those to their own neighborhoods. And supporters vastly outnumbers opponents, even when you get to apartments and buildings of 4 to 6 stories. So it's really, you may think that you're sticking your neck out, you're putting yourself at odds with your neighbors when you accommodate for what's the environmentally right thing to do, but really it's not true. You've got a few loud folks who tend to take up a lot of space and jump on things early, but the majority of people in your community in all likelihood would support getting rid of exclusionary zoning. And I mean, what this leads to is our 4th point. You've got, and here's the big thing, because in October, we have another set of elections, and if we win these elections, we can get all of these things done. We can support candidates who end exclusionary zoning. But here's a big one, especially in the GTA and in the city of Toronto. In Toronto, we need candidates who are committed to approving a lot more homes and planning for a lot more homes in the city of Toronto than the provincial government is allocated to it. The provincial government is actively trying to diminish center cities, frankly, for all sorts of political reasons that I won't get into now, and diminish the share of population that lives in core cities. It is in the interest of cities, as well as in the interest of the environment, to really absorb a lot more in Toronto than the 700,000 people the government has assigned to it for the next 30 years. Toronto, if it wants to maintain its standing in the region, if we want to stop sprawl in outer suburbs, Toronto has got to build around 1.5 million homes or housing, sorry, for 1.5 million people, not 700,000 people within the next 30 years. And we can readily do that through a combination of getting rid of exclusionary zoning, stopping McMansionization, and just building, as many units of homes as we can within existing neighborhoods. And so we are going to actually be putting out a model platform for municipal candidates, and we will kind of be working with partner organizations. And if you're part of a union, for example, you should be demanding that their endorsement criteria include these issues. And maybe you're the person who can defeat a pro-sprawl or NIMBY candidate in your area and shift the balance of your council. Here's the fifth one. I think people think this election was about Highway 413, but one of the little known parts of the picture is that actually the federal government had already designated 413 as a federal environmental assessment, which means that the federal government could stop it within its jurisdiction based on a federally listed endangered species and Aboriginal and treaty rights being affected by the highway. So it is entirely within the power of the federal government to stop the 413, which means that whatever the Ford government may say, it's really worth your while to talk to your federal MP and demand that they implement a full environmental assessment, a stringent environmental assessment, an assessment that we know is going to result in refusal of the 413 project. Because there's really, I think it's quite clear what the impacts would be on endangered species in particular, which is a federal jurisdiction, if 413 went ahead. And here's the sixth one. It may seem like a lot, a big demand to leap back into campaigning right after this tough period and this tough election. But here's something you can do that's a fun way to fight. The clearer, the more people know about natural spaces and farmland, the more they recognize them as concrete places that they've been, the harder it is for politicians to destroy them. Places like the headwaters of the Brothers Creek and the Peel Plain, these sometimes are vague in people's minds. But by going to get to know those places, by bringing your friends and relatives to see what these places are, either that would be bulldozed directly when it comes to farmland or destroyed in their ecological value when it comes to those slivers of surviving forest and ravine, you can make it really hard, really politically unpalatable to designate those areas for sprawl. And so part of this is get out there and have a good time and bring your friends while you're at it. Thanks a lot, folks. And I guess I'll talk to you later when it's question time.
Thanks very much, Phil. That was a great presentation, great slides, and very informative. We'd like to now move on to our second speaker, who is Jenni LeForestier. Jenni lives in Caledon, Ontario. She's the co-chair of StopSprawl Peel, a board member with Gravel Watch Ontario, a member of the Stop 413, as well as the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition. You can see that she's clearly a troublemaker of the best kind and proud of it. Over to you, Jenni.
Thank you. I'll just ask if Phil could stop sharing his screen. There we go. I'll try and get mine up. So building on what Phil has been talking about, there has been a lot of discussion since the election about Premier Ford's so-called mandate to build the highway because he got 83 seats. And there's been lots of assumptions made on social media and in the media itself that, you know, now we can't stop the 413 because it's a done deal. There's, as Phil said, there's nothing further from the truth because Premier Ford and Minister of Transport Carol Mulrooney have yet to submit a project description to the Federal Environmental Impact Assessment Agency. So until they do, a decision on whether the project warrants a full assessment cannot be made. His election promises to quote unquote get it done ignores the process that is required by his own ministry and the federal government to justify the project and its impacts. The investigations that have been done by the media as to who benefits from the projects, namely a handful of developers and the build construction lobby, versus what devastation will occur for the 59-kilometer highway has been highly illuminating. And you would hope that the federal government would certainly consider that and take that into account. The project would destroy about 1,000 hectares, nearly 2,500 acres of significant natural areas, including the Greenbelt lands and the National Conservation Reserve and the Niagara Escarpment, actually. It would cross streams and rivers an estimated 132 times, contaminating those rivers with every crossing. The highway would negatively impact at least 29 at-risk and endangered species and over 100 protected species of birds. As noted by the Toronto Star investigations that were done close to the election, around 70% of towns in the province have at least one quarry for construction aggregate like gravel. And given the demand that has been spawned by this highway agenda, by projects like the 413 and the Bradford Bypass, more mines are popping up, and a number of the 5,000 or so that are existing have applied for what they call expansions, such as the one in Burlington on Mount Nemo, which plans to grow by a whopping 78 hectares. We also have one in Caledon that, while there's no formal proposal, we know that it's coming. It's a blasting quarry, almost 1,000 acres that will go below the water table, just north of Forks of the Credit Provincial Park. It will be an absolutely devastating project by a Brazilian strip mining company. And the material from that quarry will be for the highway. So expansion is a misleading term in the aggregate industry, as these mines must actually seek new licenses. So the gravel mining industry is one of many that is seeing application processes streamlined over the heads of impacted municipalities themselves. So the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition formed this year. Many of you may have heard of it, with our main goal to put a pause on new gravel license applications, given that the government has already greenlit enough gravel extraction to produce a total of a staggering 2 billion tons. The gravel mining industry is authorized to extract 13 times more gravel every year than what we use currently. So from more than 5,000 existing gravel mine sites in Ontario, you can see that the impact of this highway building will be absolutely huge. And it's not simply just the 59 kilometers of the highway itself. Those extraction sites will be located within the routes of the proposed highways, either side. So the 413 is not only unlocking sprawl for development, it's also scarring the landscape and scraping away the best prime farmland and soil of places that should be protected, like the Niagara Escarpment, which is a UNESCO World Biosphere, and the Greenbelt. Members of the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition have been gathering support for a moratorium on all new gravel license applications. We need reform, and we need an assessment of how much gravel is actually really necessary. So Ontario is losing its ability to feed itself. Loss of food security is happening right now. According to the latest data from the Census of Agriculture released last month, from 2016 to 2021, Ontario lost 4.7% of its productive farmland, which translates into 319 acres per day, which is up from the previous rate of 175 acres. So that's 9 family farms per week, which is completely unsustainable. And there are better options. There are less expensive options. There are less environmentally destructive options. One of the things that the Stop the 413 movement has been really advocating for over the last 8 months is freeing the 407, getting some lanes working for trucks so that they can get off the regional roads and actually move their goods along a highway that frankly has been virtually empty during the pandemic. We know it's lost money and owes the people of the province of Ontario, well over $1 billion at this point. It was $1 billion in 2020, so who knows what it is now. So we have been systematically going to councils and asking that they advocate for freeing the 407, and we have been well received. So I think this is an action that many people on this call could take, and it needs political pressure, and it needs lots of voices. Because the stalemate is, we can't do that. It's owned by this corporation and they're not going to do it, but they will if there's enough political pressure. So highway building over public health and education funding needs to be politically stigmatized as an infamous betrayal of public trust. And I think the disappointing thing with this election is that, not all the groups came together enough. And I think that has to change in the next few months, years, that we're literally being forced to choose between our kids' health and education, our parents' health, our long-term care, and a highway that is not for the public. It's clearly for development interests. So as Phil noted, write to Minister Guilbeault, tweet and email him. He has not had enough political pressure so far. Write to your MPP, have them write to Minister Guilbeault, get your organizations to write to Minister Guilbeault, and let's make this project a complete political nightmare. And that's my time.
Thanks, Jenny. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Activist all from start to finish. Awesome. And very informative as well. Thank you. Okay, our third and final speaker today is Lilly Noble. She has a master's in molecular biology from U of T. She lived in Sudbury for 20 years and helped create and co-chair the community group Coalition for a Livable Sudbury, an NGO focused on advocacy, research, action, and encouraging citizen engagement. Lilly was also the environmental NGO representative on the Greater Sudbury Drinking Water Source Protection Committee for 14 years. Lilly moved to Hamilton in January 2021 and became a volunteer member of StopSprawl Hamilton, Ontario, and has been involved in creating and amplifying their message on social media, maintaining the website, lawn sign distribution, and advocating at City Hall to prevent an urban boundary expansion in Hamilton into prime farmland. Now, Lilly was concerned that all that success might be lost if Ford won the election. So I really look forward to hearing what she has to say. Lilly, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks everyone. Yeah, I'm glad to be here to speak to all of you tonight about some of the things that StopSprawl HamOnt did to get our city council to maintain our urban boundary and share some ideas about what next steps we can do under another Ford government. Let's get the slides going here. Okay, in Hamilton, we wanted to save farmland, which is of course vital to Ontario's future and food security. We wanted development to efficiently use existing urban land to create walkable, bikeable, transit-friendly, climate-resilient neighborhoods with a variety of housing options. We knew we couldn't afford to lose more farmland to sprawl, and our city certainly couldn't afford to maintain more infrastructure on the outskirts of the city. We knew we could never reach our climate goals if we built 3,300 acres of car-dependent sprawl, and we knew the types of homes people needed, wanted, and could afford were likely to be built in existing neighborhoods. So we mobilized. We gathered like-minded citizens and we drew on their many strengths and talents. We held rallies and we put up signs. I mean, we put up signs everywhere. We got volunteers to help distribute 1,600 lawn signs over 6 months. Each of those black dots was where a sign was located. We were visible, not only on the streets, but we used social media to its full potential. Let me just make sure you're not seeing me in this video and you're seeing my slides. So just in the past 60 days, we were able to reach 150,000 people through Facebook ads. It's important to reach as many people as possible, and social media does that really well, and you can find your people by using that. We educated and informed people about what we could lose. By connecting with many people, we helped the city get 18,000 responses to their survey on expanding the urban boundary. Councillors were surprised. They had never seen such a response to a municipal survey. And 90% of those responses said no to urban boundary expansion. Council and planning staff really had to listen. So now there are many StopSprawl groups in Ontario. You can see them all listed here, and we include Stop the 413 with us. And we like to call ourselves StopSprawl Ontario. So some municipalities voted not to expand their urban boundaries. Yay, Halton yesterday, but others actually did expand their urban boundaries. But either way, we'll need good councillors as we move forward on building compact, people-friendly neighborhoods with affordable housing options. Local planning decisions, as Phil was saying, really make a big difference on how we build. So find out which candidates are running for council this October and see who will be a champion to building more medium density homes and help them win. Join a group that wants to allow more affordable middle density housing to be built in your city, or make your own group. Find them on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or TikTok. Here are 5 housing advocacy groups. I'll mention especially More Neighbors Toronto. They're really great advocates for trying to get more homes built in Toronto, within the city. We should welcome secondary dwelling units, granny suites, backyard suites, and laneway suites. Here are a few examples of a laneway suite. The suite is the purple one, and the brown one is a backyard suite in Hamilton. They are more affordable. They're fully functional. They have washrooms, bedrooms, living rooms, kitchens. They're more affordable than primary houses, and you can have your older parents in there, or a younger family member that wants to live in your neighborhood but can't afford a full primary home there. They can also bring in a secondary income to a primary homeowner. So try to get your city to allow these SDUs because they're very handy for creating more affordable housing. We're in an housing affordability crisis in Ontario. In Hamilton alone, we need 10,000 more affordable housing units. Let's be creative and use land efficiently. Let's build pocket neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods within a neighborhood. Lobby your city to remove exclusionary zoning, as Phil mentioned, which basically only allows single-family homes to be built in most neighborhoods. Cities should change these zoning rules to allow semis, townhouses, row houses, and 3 and 4 plexes to be built everywhere where a little bungalow perhaps is being torn down. Because this is where people want to live, in existing neighborhoods where there are already amenities, there's shops, there's transit already available. So on the left, you'll see a 4-plex that's in Hamilton. 4 families live there. And on the right is one of these McMansions, the same square footage, but only 1 family lives there. And if you're unfamiliar with exclusionary zoning and why we have it in most cities right now, there's a good historical read in this book called House Divided. It's House Divided, How the Missing Middle Can Solve Toronto's Affordability Crisis. And it's really a great resource if you need a book to read this summer. Also, we need to support local farmers. Farmers are our allies. Visit farmers markets. They feed us and they need us. We're StopSprawl Ontario now. We'll mobilize again. And now we are united. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Lily. Another excellent presentation. Some really great ideas on what to actually do in communities. I'd like you to open up to the 3 speakers and ask them a couple questions, and then move to the Q&A from the people who've attended the seminar. First thing is, it seems, and please, whoever wants to answer this, go ahead. It seems very clear that the federal environmental assessment is absolutely key to whether Doug Ford can move forward the way he'd want to or not. And I'd like perspectives from each of you as to what could undermine that, or how confident you are, A, that it'll happen, B, that it'll happen the way it needs to happen, and C, that it won't somehow be skirted. Would you like to start, Phil?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the key risk here is that they choose not to do the full environmental assessment, and that they do just something very superficial, or actually that even though they designated it, they conclude that an assessment isn't needed for some reason. And a key factor in preventing that from happening is to make submissions to the environmental assessment process, but also, frankly, and they will never admit this, and it's not supposed to be the case, but we know that the other side will be leaning on government MPs and opposition MPs, but especially government MPs, trying to get them to step away from this and let the 413 go ahead. They'll be trying to claim, oh, well, we just had a provincial election over it, and clearly people are fine with it. You've got to just aggressively, you grill your MP, pin them down, buttonhole them, make them, you send them an email, copy them and say, we want a full environmental assessment, that will shut down the 413. And then you copy everybody on their response, right? You really got to pin them down. don't let them back away. And apart from that, I mean, if they have a proper, thorough environmental assessment, if they keep hearing from people that, you know, they've got to do that, like, we are fairly confident that the result will be that 413 can't go ahead. But you gotta, this is a dangerous moment because, like I said, you know, they're going to claim that somehow the public doesn't want this environmental assessment, or it wants to go ahead with 413. And that's why it's so important not to concede that point, to point to the fact that most people voted for parties that wanted to cancel the 413, to point to the fact that we know from the polling that most people actually oppose it, or a lot more people oppose it than support it.
Phil, do you have a resource probably on the Environmental Defense website for people who want to pursue that?
Yeah, absolutely. I just I'll
Put that
post
up
it
in the chat, maybe.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Okay. Lily, would you like to comment on that?
No, I think Jenny probably has a better handle on whole 413.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really is about political pressure and making this the most ridiculous, ugliest project, as we all know, you know, who've been fighting it for years, that it is, and making it a hot potato that nobody wants to touch. We got there with the political parties, you know, we got there with the Liberals and the Greens and the NDP. And it wasn't hard, really. I mean, even going to council to council to council, you know, when you spread out the facts on what this highway is going to do and the impacts, it's pretty hard to argue. And it was canceled already once. So, you know, but the thing is, as Phil has pointed out, we're in a dangerous time right now. Ford does have all of that majority, and he is, you know, making a lot of noise like he's got the mandate, but he doesn't, and we know that he doesn't. So we have work to do. We need to mobilize everyone to really get in touch with their MPs, their MPPs, write to Minister Guilbeault, write op-eds to the local papers, keep talking about it. Don't let this sort of fade into the distance like it's a done deal. Keep raising a stink. I think that's really important. And we're certainly going to keep working with the media and still, you know, uncovering what's going on behind the scenes with this highway project.
What's the timing on all of this for the pressure?
So he stalled submitting the project description. Like, we've been waiting for it for about a year now. And clearly they didn't want to submit it before the election. So it's really anybody's guess. You know, he could be very confident and put it in tomorrow, or he could wait and let things cool down and let people forget about it. It's hard to say, actually, but yeah, I don't know.
And
Really
when that is submitted, it'll be publicly available? It'll have
Yes.
to be publicly available?
Yes.
And do you see any reason why the federal government would be at all interested in promoting it or supporting it? The Liberals supporting the Ontario provincial Conservatives?
I mean, I don't know. You know, the confusing thing about this was even the Liberals, when they said they didn't support the 413, still talked about a transportation corridor.
The provincial Liberals.
Yeah, the provincial Liberals. So still wanting to open up a corridor and develop that corridor. And they've been absolutely, frankly, useless on the Bradford bypass. You know, they haven't stepped up on the Bradford bypass. So it's hard to say. And I think that's another reason to keep pushing and to keep showing up at rallies and protesting and making a lot of noise, because it's a dangerous time, as Phil said. You know, we don't really know where they stand. Minister Guilbeault has been pretty quiet on this file and not committing anything. So
Interesting. Moving on to this, all of these suggestions for infill and modular homes, granny suites, backyard suites. Given the affordability crisis and the housing crisis, I can't imagine that an awful lot of people aren't very interested in that, just personally. Even people who have large homes and everything else, that those support for that would be wide, and that the local councils would be interested, because I assume they get more municipal, you know, taxes as a result. Any of you want, Lily, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, Hamilton just approved their STU policy, I think last year or early this year. And so tons of people are applying to build STUs now in Hamilton. I think Toronto's already got that in place. In Vancouver, certainly, they were probably the first municipality to allow it. And there are tons, as you can imagine, in Vancouver, where affordability has always been difficult. So yeah, they're great little units if you've got room in your backyard or in a laneway. They're just a great option if you can build one.
Well, I think a lot of people, especially young people, realize they just don't need a huge, they don't need to take so much of their income for housing, and they don't need a big space. And so I think things are shifting very quickly on that front, especially among the youth. Phil, you want to pipe in on that question?
No, not. I think it's covered pretty well.
Okay. This thing about exclusionary zoning. Oh no, sorry. Actually, I'll just ask one more question. I would, when you were all presenting, I was wondering whether the municipalities wouldn't have competitions among each other to get more housing within their local areas, because it would be of interest to them from a tax base, whether it's infill or multiple unit housing. And I'm curious if that is the case, whether they actually compete over this, and whether that isn't a way to draw them, to pull the municipalities forward.
If there were reason prevailing, they would be doing that, and in some cases they are. Certainly, you know, Oakville has an interest in attracting a high-rise development to parts of their, you know, municipality, and we see that. But it's very fickle, I think, because, you know, there are, you know, these kind of development interests that want the sprawl to be developed, and so at regional councils, they'll lean on councillors not to improve the intensification and to improve the sprawl instead. So, you know, the incentives of councillors aren't always aligned with the incentives of the municipalities. And your job, you know, over the next few months is to align the incentives of your councillor with the incentives of the municipality and of the environment by demanding that they make these commitments.
I live in Ottawa, and I've watched it too many times. The developers have incredible sway, unfortunately, and all the suburban councillors go with the mayor, who's in the keeps of the development industry, unfortunately.
And there's an opportunity, I think, to turn these two groups of developers against each other, right? Because there are people who, you know, small players who just, you know, would flip a house and turn it into a few townhomes or, you know, a multiplex. Those are different people almost always than the people who would build towers, but they're also different people than the people who build suburban residential. And in Ottawa, you're in a weird position because you have Minto building sprawl and towers, both. I mean, that's an unusual circumstance, but for the most part, they're opposing groups of people with conflicting interests.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Terry, I'd like to turn it over to you and some questions from the audience. Thank you, Jenny, Phil, Lily.
Thanks for that, Ken. So I'm just scrolling through the chat. There's a huge number of really good comments and some interesting questions. One of them I'd like to start with is to have to do with the land tribunal. I guess this is the reformed, so to speak, Ontario Municipal Board. And I'd like to just get some sense about the degree to which municipalities are free to basically deal with things like these exclusionary bylaws without having the Ontario Land Tribunal jumping all over them. So what's the balance of power here with respect to this new, relatively new entity, the Ontario Land Tribunal? Phil, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I mean, a big part of my career and my practice even now is, you know, litigation before the Ontario Land Tribunal. And, you know, my take is, you know, there are some changes that have been made by the provincial government recently that will complicate, you know, the getting rid of exclusionary zoning, that could make it possible for people to appeal those changes and bog them down for a while. But in the end, I don't see anything in the heart. Like, there's a big difference between the actual planning law and the kind of stuff that the Premier wants and Minister Clark want, and that they'll try and bully municipalities into. I don't see an obstacle in the law to really getting rid of exclusionary zoning at the municipal level. municipalities are taking steps towards doing that already. There are initiatives in Hamilton, I think you've heard from Lily, but also in the city of Toronto to legalize multiplex housing all across the city. Multiplex just means, you know, it looks like one house on the outside, but it's actually divided into 3 on the inside. You know, those are going ahead. And I don't think there's really any prospect that they're not lawful.
Okay. Jenny or Lily, want to comment on that, or should we just move on?
I just want to say that we're changing our rules here in Hamilton so that multiplexes can be allowed. Ford had the Ontario Housing Affordability Task Force. They wanted to also change exclusionary zoning rules across all of Ontario, but then he changed his mind right before the election. So we'll see if he brings that back across the board. And that's about all I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you for that. There's Carrie Hill put a question in the chat about the province forcing cities to build, whether or not a city needs this, and uses Kingston as a case in point, where luxury high rises have gone up, whether or not the city determines that they're actually useful. But Carrie is talking about the need for affordable housing units that developers don't want to build. And I guess the question is how are we going to get those affordable housing units built? So I think this question is a kind of a trying to address 2 things at the same time. How do we infill, and how do we actually increase density in the cities, but do it at an affordable level where real people can actually afford these units that are being constructed at the same time? Phil, do you want to start there?
So, I mean, to start with, I think there are 2 separate things. It's funny that, you know, the affordability issue always comes up when someone is proposing a market development, but it wouldn't necessarily come up if no one was proposing to build anything, you know? And so the first step I would say is one measure you can take is to actually have much stricter requirements, much more stringent height restrictions, setback requirements, etc., for low density and market housing than you would for affordable, like deeply affordable housing built by a public entity or a social housing agency. So let's be very real here. Like, we can't really, it's not going to happen that developers are somehow magically going to build deeply affordable housing out of their own pocket without they're just not going to build it on their own. So really, we have to talk about the public paying with tax money for public rent geared to income housing built by the public, owned by the public, large numbers of them, like we did, you know, in the late 70s. In the late 70s, around 20% of new homes that were built were actual public housing or subsidized rent geared to income housing. And now it's something like 2 or 3% max, right? That's not sustainable. Like, we've got to build it. And that means you got to stop voting for politicians who promise low taxes. You got to vote for people like you here in Toronto City Hall, people like Gord Perks, who say, I want to increase property taxes by this percentage in order to build more subsidized housing. That's the answer. I don't know why we pop our heads up whenever someone wants to build a market building, and all of a sudden only then talk about, no, talk at budget time. Talk when someone is talking about taxes. Tell them, no, I do not want low taxes. I want public housing. And so we saw from both the Liberals and the New Democrats and the Greens as well, all of them were talking about public builders building hundreds of thousands of actual affordable units. Yeah, I like it. Inclusionary zoning can only work within the margins. The way inclusionary zoning works is it basically uses the market home builders, and they're paying for the non-market units. But the problem is the people buying those market units are also probably lower income on average than the people who can buy the existing homes in your community. Because people buying condominiums, like condominiums, we know the purchasers of those, they're not rich people. They're less rich than the people who buy low-rise homes. Like, you are probably richer than the people buying these condos, and we've got to understand that too. So like, really, it's old-fashioned build public housing. That's what we should be talking about, or social agencies, building it, right? And us.
Jenni, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just another thing to add is that I don't think we're doing a very good job in Ontario of balancing the Ontario Heritage Act with the growth plan. And I think that's been a problem for a really, really long time. We have a lot of inventory in a lot of these communities that is just being allowed to fall down and become useless. And sometimes it's, demolition by neglect, sometimes it's deliberate, but there needs to be more of a push, I think, to adaptive reuse of those buildings. When you see communities that have been doing that well for the last 10, 15, 20 years, communities like St. Mary's, communities in near London, Ontario, there are many examples actually, and in Ottawa region as well, where they've taken that heritage inventory and they've creatively adapted it and used it for social housing, or they've used it for some kind of mixed use housing. And we're not doing that enough, and we're not getting our municipalities to do that enough. And I think we're really missing something with that, because those buildings are gems, number one, but also, they were built well, and they were designed well, and they were designed for families to live sustainably. So I think rather than just building new all the time, I think we need to start looking at the Ontario Heritage Act and give it a lot more teeth.
Okay. So Ken, we're at 8 o'clock. And so I just wanted to know whether or not you want to just move into the after chat portion, or do you want to sort of formally call an end to this particular part of the meeting and then transition into that? You're muted, Ken.
Darn, I hate when that happens, even 2 years into Zoom. Okay, I just wanted to say a couple words, and then let people go, and we'll move into the after chat. First of all, thank you for everyone who has attended. So this hour, we had almost 3 times as many people sign up who were on. So please tell your friends or email people if you found this useful, insightful, or inspiring any other way, which I can't imagine you wouldn't, given the quality of the presentations and the people presenting it. Please tell people we will put it up on YouTube, and that will be available hopefully in a few days, in not too many days, and encourage people to watch it over the summer. Thank you for everyone who has attended, and you're welcome to disappear now or stay with us. And I'd just like to make one other thing. I've been reading recently an incredible book on climate change by Michael Mann. It just came out in the last year or two. It's called The New Climate War. And I've been working on the unfolding climate catastrophe for about a decade. And I find on almost every page, I find some new insight into things I knew something about, but not everything about. And he really focuses on the deniers, the delayers, and the deferrers. And I would highly recommend this. I think it's going to end up being sort of one of my climate Bibles once I finish reading it. So I just wanted to pitch that quickly as a great summer read while you're enjoying Canada's summer. And I'd just like to formally thank the 3 guests we have. They are staying with us, but I thought I'd formally thank them before we go to the after chat. Thank you, Phil, Jenni, Lily. Great presentations, all 3, and incredibly useful information and great work you're doing. Thank you. Okay, so people can leave if they want, and we'll move into the after chat now. Terry, did you want to ask?
Yeah, there's a question about the Bradford bypass and why that hasn't been included in the environmental assessment. Jenni, what's the politics around that?
Oh, it's so sad. It's the environmental assessment that was done is very old. It was back in 92 or 93. It's an old assessment, and unfortunately, they were not required to do a new one. And so it was very easy for Minister Gabot to not grant a federal impact assessment. The Bradford bypass is in a lot of ways an even more disastrous highway because of where it is on the Holland Marsh and there's all sorts of archaeological artifacts there. The First Nations have not been consulted. They haven't been consulted appropriately on the 413 either, but it's such a sensitive area and endangered species and turtles and the whole thing. So Guilbeault is the federal minister of the environment. So he's the one that should be targeted to write to and copy on op-eds or anything that you're writing about the highways and in opposition to the highways. And I can't stress enough that the Bradford bypass should have a full impact assessment and frankly should be canceled. It's just an affront. It's not necessary. It's 16 kilometers of devastation through some of the best farmland in the country.
Yeah, and it's proceeding at pace right now. Anybody who's driving up that corridor, can see it being constructed right in front of them. And so, do you think that there's any capacity for us to build a campaign that would actually force the feds to put that into the environmental assessment package, and therefore bring it to a halt, while that environmental assessment's proceeding?
I think that's a question for some environmental lawyers. I think there's a case for the fact that our environmental Bill of Rights have been completely trampled on with that highway. And it's definitely going to impact our food security for generations to come. And I think there needs to be much more public knowledge about the fact that, that highway where it's located is a sprawl scheme. It's opening a bunch of land for the orbit developments and for other developments so that York region can sprawl at just a heinous amount. And so, I think it's not over till it's over, even though they're doing early works and they're building and they're putting their signs up. There's still a lot of opposition on these highways, especially the Bradford bypass and the 413.
So Phil, what's your take on this? Do you think that this is stoppable?
So, the trick is, because I am counsel for environmental defense, I don't want to comment because I'm counsel for environmental defense. I think it's something we're going to have to continue exploring, and you may hear about it.
Okay, so there's been a number of comments about the impact of sprawl on farmland, and the fact that many farmers in the urban areas surrounding cities, or the suburban areas surrounding cities, are selling their land or being forced to sell their land to speculators. And these speculators are actually the ones that control the land and are basically in a position to put political pressure on the politicians that continues the sprawl process. So, I guess the question is what do we do about protecting agricultural land in the urban fringe so that we can cut the speculators off and cut them off in terms of their political sway that they hold in municipal council, politics?
Yeah, I think we need an agricultural reserve. I think we need to get serious about our food security, and we just haven't been. The numbers, 309 acres, I think I said, per week, 9 family farms, like that's a ridiculous amount of loss of farmland, and we can't actually grow food on the Canadian Shield. So what are we planning to do 10, 15 years from now? It's a terrible proposition, and I think what gets overlooked is that there are young farmers who lease land and rent land and want to make a go of it, and they need to be encouraged and they need to be incentivized. They need to have better planning around their farms so that they can move their equipment. It needs to be a whole movement of really recognizing that we have Ontario heritage, which is farmland, and it needs to be protected. And that's, I think, what's missing.
So I know that the National Farmers Union has been very strong on some of these themes. Is there any other organizations active in this field that you could point people to that they could become active or associated with?
Ontario Federation of Agriculture has also been very vocal about the loss of farmland, and NFU, and just local, even local farm co-ops and cooperatives. We've used not used, but we've had a few delegate to Stop the 413 that are actually active farmers, and they've spoken about their concerns, and they are around, they are there. You just have to find them through the noise of the speculators and we call them frozen farmers who, they complain about the fact that their land has been frozen because of the 413. And yet they've really been waiting to be able to sell it for $1 million an acre. I mean, they could have sold it at any time. It wasn't actually frozen, but they've waited until they've speculated on this land. And that, we've been calling out and getting those young farmers and those farmers that are still trying to make a go of it, speak up.
It's a bit of a dangerous red herring, I think, that's sometimes brought up, the ownership of the land. Like, listen, the fact that speculators have bought the land, it does create some difficulties of certainty for farmers, etc. But there is no legal reason why we can't say, no, yeah, you may own this land, speculator, but you will never, ever, ever get to use it as anything but farmland. It will never be developed, and you can go cry about it, and we will laugh. You like there's no reason you can't do that. There's no right to do what you like with your land when it goes against zoning, or if it's prohibited. I mean, they bought farmland. They don't have any prima facie right to do anything with it other than rent it out to someone to be farmed. And in fact, they are being rented out to farmers right now. Unfortunately, there's uncertainty because, oftentimes the protection hasn't been made permanent. But, especially if you make it permanent, then, that's a long-term protection. Whoever owns it, it's going to be agricultural land for the long term, and farmers can start to make those long-term decisions about how to use that land. In fact, it's usually these days, especially in Durham, which is really considering a ridiculously huge boundary expansion, it's the sprawl developers, it's the land speculators, it's the councillors who want to support sprawl who are saying, oh, well, the speculators have bought up the land anyway, as though that makes a difference. And it doesn't. They own it. So what? We can still farm it, and we can, that's what the current state of the law is meant to do, right? It's off limits for development.
There was a comment in chat about farmers being forced, not really producing food to deal with the food security issue so much as producing a lot of, corn and other crops that go into the industrial livestock system, and that breaking out of that is a difficult thing for farmers to do. So I take it what you're saying is that this is going to require a whole series of policy instruments in order to be able to address. Municipalities can address it. I take it through zoning bylaws, but we're going to need, if we're going to have an agricultural reserve, I take it that belongs to the province. That's where we would have to focus our guns on, because municipalities will only control the zoning of property that's already within their boundaries.
Yeah, and I would just comment that we had a situation in Peel region where they opened up 11,000 acres for sprawl across the Peel Plain, which was, we fought it tooth and nail. We had over 1,000 delegates and letters, and we made a lot of noise, but they were gung-ho to go through with the process because they had developer interests, and the council was, I think, pretty compromised. But unfortunately, one of the mayors actually tried to get quite a lot of acres rezoned from greenbelt and prime farmland to rural residential. And he almost did it. He was almost successful. Fortunately, it was last minute. Staff hadn't had a chance to see it. It surprised the chief planner. He looked pretty snaky, and they deferred it. But that kind of thing is happening in a lot of council rooms, and just because it's in an official plan, if you can rezone anything without public consultation, without opening up for a discussion with your electorate, then anything goes, and that needs to change.
I just mentioned that when you take 3,300 acres, for instance, and you zone it as urban instead of agricultural, the farmers that are there are really left in a tight spot. Around them, subdivisions could start popping up, and their 100 acres, suddenly they can't do whatever farming they were doing because neighbors start to complain. You're making dust, you're making noise, you're a farm and we're residential. Also, when you have these little pockets of farmers around and you don't have a real, huge group of farmers, the businesses that supply these farmers say, well, this isn't worth my while to now, keep my business open supplying 3 farmers. They start to shut down. The farmers that are left there can't continue farming profitably. So the zoning is so important that's not changed, and that the agricultural land, even if they're growing cash crops, that land is still viable. In the future, this land that we're talking about in Southern Ontario, which is mostly classified class 1, 2, and 3 soil, which is the best soil there is, that's the soil that will function really well in climate change, whether there's droughts or floods. This kind of soil can adapt really well to feed us. And as California starts to struggle with water and heat, people are going to start looking north. Where are we going to be able to feed ourselves? And do you want to be the place that says, well, we don't have any farmland anymore, we better start importing food from somewhere else? Like, who gets priority on food if you're importing? Like, we know what happens with COVID vaccines. So that's, it's just really short-sighted to change zoning for housing when you can do it all in a city.
There's been a couple of comments in chat having to do with the gravel industry and the privileged position that aggregate production gets, I guess, in provincial policy statements at the provincial level, that municipalities are directed to protect sources of aggregate supply into the future that are necessary for the growth of how does that fit into Ford's growth strategy? And I know that there was a couple of people made reference to organizations which are trying to organize either against the gravel industry or to contain it. Reform Gravel, I think, was one that was mentioned in chat. I think the other one has to do with Gravel Watch Ontario. What's the politics around this, about the relationship between the aggregate industry and the urban fringe, and the privileged position that the aggregate industry gets from the province?
Yeah, I can comment. So I'm a board member on Gravel Watch and also on the steering committee for Reform Gravel Mining. So the first thing that Ford did when the election started was stand in a quarry and say, we're going to get it done. This is where the 413 is going to come through, even though it was actually 15 kilometers north of there. But the relationship between the gravel industry and the Ford government has been obvious really since day one. I mean, the first thing they did was have a secret aggregate meeting and open up a whole bunch of rules and change the rules and change the game so that it was easier for these licenses to be approved. And the municipalities, we're trying to keep up. I mean, they get a bit of money from the gravel guys, but they don't get a lot. And it would be surprising to know, the taxes that gravel industry pays for municipalities. It's like, I know in Caledon, it's like $367,000 a year for them to do their operations. But meanwhile, their trucks are tearing up the roads and they're all over the town. And, there's dust and there's particulate and there's the incessant, noise and traffic and dangerous traffic. So it's been a problem. And I think we saw when we started going to the municipalities and asking for a moratorium, we were well received. And we were actually initially a little bit surprised how well received we were. And it was because the municipalities had had enough. They'd had enough of being told what they had to approve. They'd had enough of having the OLT hanging over their head. That, they have residents that are complaining that they're concerned about their well water. They're concerned about the impact to the rivers or the dust and the traffic. Usually it's traffic. And so there's a sense that, this idea of no need to show need, which is what the gravel industry operates on, that needs to stop. Like, we actually need to rationalize how much gravel we use per year and how much licensing needs to happen per year, rather than allowing these gravel mines to operate, not finish, abandon the mine, and then ask for a pit expansion, quote unquote, or another application across the street. So you get this never ending applications of gravel and you're not rehabilitating any of it. And that's the issue that that needs to be addressed. Like we really do need reform.
Okay, so Gravel Watch Ontario, you're on the board of that, and that's an
Yep.
organization to pay attention to if people want to get involved or active in that. And there's also, what is this called? Reform Gravel Ontario? What's that about?
Reform Gravel Mining Coalition. So that is a group of many members and community members from all across Ontario that have endorsed the moratorium on new gravel license applications.
Okay, so that's a moratorium on new licensing pending some kind of a relationship between the demand and the need for it
That's right.
versus the number of acreage that municipalities are forced to then reserve, for that purpose.
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. Just trying to scroll through some other things here. There's one person who's asked about tiny homes and about what's the politics around tiny homes and whether or not that is a partial solution to the housing affordability crisis, but also can it also be attached to efforts to try to deal with density?
So on that, yeah, tiny homes are, act an extremely useful tool. But whether you call them tiny homes or frankly, what we'd call tiny homes these days are just homes. Like that's what homes were. Before we lost our minds and started, sprawling madly over everywhere. Like my first house in Toronto, single detached house built in 1914, was around 850 square feet, fully single detached house, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It was just very compact on a smaller piece of land, right? And so, small houses, compact houses, and yes, tiny homes as well. So the tiny homes typically, really, we would be talking about something like a garden suite, it's called. So it's a house behind another house in a backyard. The neat thing about it is that for all sorts of legal technical reasons, it counts as a separate single family home. So when the government says your municipality needs to approve X number of single family homes, and the sprawl developers say, oh, well, this we can't get them into existing neighborhoods, so we have to build it on farmland. So the answer is that you could very easily build a lot more single family homes in existing neighborhoods in the form of these small or tiny homes. So one is the backyard garden suite. The other is just lot splits. So there were so many homes that we built, in the immediate post-war period that were small. Like they're right now, they're already pretty small. They're around 900 square feet, those strawberry box houses, but they use the lot in a very inefficient way because they really weren't thinking about any constraint on land use. So right now what's happening with our current rules is because of land values, those are all on a track to be torn down within the next 30 years and replaced by something, 3.5 times larger, right? These big mansions on what used to be the strawberry box homes. But we could change those rules. So instead you build 3 homes around the same size as the original, strawberry box house that a similar family could have. Like people have been raising their kids in those houses for years. Families could continue to do that, but you build 3 on that same lot in a compact form, whether that's a semi-detached home and a single, or 2 semis and a garden suite in the back. There are lots of ways to get 3 homes onto what were those strawberry box lots and still have ground access, still have a little garden for everybody. I mean, the main thing you got to cut out is the on-lot parking. And people have to really get rid of the idea that you have parking on the lot and you just get used to parking on the street. It's something we all have to get used to.
Okay, so a number of people have asked about tools. I mean, all 3 of you have indicated that it's really important to become involved in municipal politics at one level or another. That there's, despite the fact that, Ford's in control, there is considerable amount of leverage municipalities can use if they want to. And that, depends largely on what you're saying on the degree to which, members are mobilized. So community members are mobilized. So will there be resources available, do you think? What are the kinds of resources, let's put it that way, available to people who want to get more active in the municipal campaigns that take place and culminate, I guess, on October 24th? So between now and then, if people want to get more active, what are some of the resources that are available to help people do that? Phil?
So environmental defense is going to be creating model platforms, or basically, key platform planks that any candidate should have. If you're thinking of running, if someone wants to be the environment candidate, or the progressive candidate, or the social justice candidate, these planks have to be in there. So we'll have that document. There'll be different versions because the issues are slightly different for the City of Toronto, for the 905 and GTAH is a separate one, for the Ottawa area, and then for rural areas. We're likely going to have different platforms with some unifying planks that you can use. So there'd be that if you're thinking of running, and we're going to be circulating that to candidates. We're going to be holding webinars similar to this one, but focus on candidates, training candidates, basically informing them about these issues. A few of those of the summer and right up to the election. Third, we're going to have cards in all likelihood. So these would basically be pledge cards that you can use to say, these are the points that a environment candidate, if you want to be seen as good, because everyone will claim to be an environment candidate, but they won't. We've heard many people, I know, Lily, you've seen many people who claim they voted to declare a climate emergency, but those are often the same people who voted for Sprawl. So you need to pin them down and get a pledge for them to the concrete changes and policies that are needed in order to avoid Sprawl. And we'll give you a sheet that you can use and just stick it in front of them and say, sign this, this pledge. So those are a few of the resources we're thinking of right now.
When do you think those will be coming available? I take it it'll be on your website?
Yeah, so they're going to be on the Environmental Defense website. We're probably going to get a vanity address, which will be basically something specifically about the municipal elections. But if you Google, as an example of what you can expect, what makes a good environment plan, that was a provincial resource that we created. And a similar process, that's what resulted in, the Liberals and Democrats and Greens having really some of the best sprawl and environmental policies that they've really ever had, because we kind of got them all board using this process. We didn't get the Tories on board, but the idea is, yeah, we want to bring about an alignment using that through the website, and probably around as soon as possible. As soon as I can get it written, it'll start and get my staff to put it together and make it into a website. It'll be up.
How did you leave?
Yeah, I don't know if we lost Phil there for a second, but Jenny or Lily, are there any particular resources that you want to point to before we call it a night soon?
Not yet. We're still trying to organize in my local municipality, which is a total snake's nest, to be honest. And we've had a ward boundary review, so everything has changed for this municipal election. So now we have 2 regional councillors where we used to have 5, and we have 6 area councillors where we used to have 5. So it's a bit of a dog's breakfast. So we're still trying to see who is actually putting their name in the ring, and what it's all going to look like. We're really hoping to change our mayor, but I don't really have any resources at my fingertips yet for Peel Region. Phil's saying they're fun. Not if you live here, Phil.
Well, I said snake's nests are fun. I said,
oh, snake's nests are fun.
Yes. Garter snake, hibernacula, my kids found them once and it's been fun.
That's true.
How about you, Lily?
Yeah, I just want to mention a group in Hamilton. I think they started last year called I Elect, and they're trying to get what the platforms are of all the different candidates running. They're looking for progressive type candidates. So, in Hamilton, we just have to look at what data they're collecting. So in your own municipality, it's not too hard to ask candidates what their positions are. Sometimes they don't tell you though.
And just like in terms of resources, I just realized, like, if you want to kind of stay on top of things or just have a feed, I don't know how many of you are on Twitter, but if you follow at Pothen, at Pothen, you'll get a kind of a steady stream of updates as these resources are put online. You'll get kind of our responses to issues that come up in different communities kind of on a running basis, because I can get information up that way sometimes more quickly than we can as an official website. Yeah, and then the other one is at Enviro Defense.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll take some of the suggested resources that have been put in chat, and we'll add some to that, and we'll put out a list of resources when we send out notice when our recorded version of this event tonight is going to be up on YouTube channels of the various sponsoring organizations. So Ken, we're at about just 8:30 now, so I think we haven't answered. There's a lot of questions and a lot of comments in chat that we didn't get a chance to talk to, but we made a start, and I think we're just going to have to leave it there. So back to you.
Okay, thanks, Terry. I think it's just been a great session, very informative. Thank you to the three presenters once again, Jenny, Lily, and Phil. And hopefully everyone will let people know, especially the keeners that are still on, the 58 keeners are still on. We'll let everyone know that it was a great webinar and that other people will be able to see it soon. We'll put it out. We often have a lot of views afterwards on YouTube. So I'm hoping that will happen again, because this is really important information. We'll be doing webinars again in the fall. There's a couple we're in the midst of planning, and we'll be letting people know about those in the same through the same channels as we did for these. And so I'd just like to thank everyone who came and joined on, and have a great summer. What can we say? Bye for now.
So much.
Take care, everybody.
Have a great summer.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
I think we should have our after chat.
Well, to keep going, I mean, there's a lot of really great ideas. Boy.
I'm a science type. I'm never finished with how much we can talk about it, especially when there's all kinds of new things being brought up.
I think Phil and Jenny are gone.
Oh, that's all right. I'm just kidding. I'm just mean for whoever stay
Okay.
on a couple minutes.
So thanks for this, Lily, and whoever else is on. This is great. Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, no problem.
We got to do something again on this. This is too important to not talk continuously about. Yeah, we got a job ahead of us, don't we?
Always.
Always, always, always. Okay, so Ken, we'll have to in the next couple of days or so talk about the logistics of getting this tape turned
Yep.
around, this recording turned around. So I'm going to stop recording now, I guess.
Good idea. Yeah.
And